How do we change things that we judge to be unsatisfactory, incomplete, or just plain wrong? Entrepreneurs do it with ideas and implementation.
This is the Economics for Business podcast. We're here to help all businesses become champions for customers and value, improving lives with preferred and innovative products and services. We offer you the knowledge and tools to make your entrepreneurial journey a successful one. Now, here's your host, Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. Here at Economics for Business, we've been approached recently by a number of entrepreneurs aiming to address unsatisfactory consumer experiences in healthcare. That's a great sign. When entrepreneurs get in motion, it's because they're stimulated by end users with dissatisfactions. There are problems to be solved, wishes to be fulfilled, complaints to be addressed. As we always say, those are raw materials for innovation. The consumer initiates, the entrepreneur responds, and the consumer has the final say as to whether the responses are what they were looking for. It's the consumer who discovers and verifies innovation. Many of the dissatisfactions in healthcare occur in the area of payment systems. Not just high costs, but the nature of healthcare insurance, the lock-in style of insurer networks and healthcare systems, the curtailment of choice, the lack of flexibility. It's not so much that we have poor healthcare services, we don't, but that the administrative systems and payment systems that come between us and healthcare are so burdensome and so clumsy. But remember that consumers, or patients if you prefer, are always the ones who initiate change and innovation, and they find entrepreneurs who respond, and then they evaluate those responses. Today, we'll hear about those core principles in healthcare, that the best system is taking good care of yourself, and then, after that, to declare your dissatisfactions loudly so that entrepreneurs can hear you. There are already a plethora of emerging responsive alternatives which suggests that both consumers and entrepreneurs are doing their jobs. Today's guest is Shawn Needham. He's been an innovative entrepreneur in healthcare all of his professional life. As a specialized pharmacist who likes nothing better than to help people wean themselves off pharmaceuticals, but also as an advocate for individuals and innovation within the healthcare system generally. His book is Sickened: How the Government Ruined Healthcare and How to Fix It. We're going to focus today on the how to fix it part. Shawn, welcome to the Economics for Business podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's an honor.
You're an entrepreneur in the healthcare sector. You've started and operated a very distinctive pharmacy business. And from there, you're a keen observer of the evolving healthcare sector and its business model challenges. And most importantly, you see a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities for innovation and change, and how each of us can act to make those changes occur in the healthcare business structure and the healthcare processes. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But we always like, Shawn, to have you tell people your origin story. How did you get into the pharmacy business and that part of the healthcare system?
Wow, I got to go way back for that, actually. So, in high school, actually, I had my advanced chemistry teacher talked to me about pharmacy. I always loved chemistry, and I grew up in a small town, and I wanted to be able to work in a small town. And usually when you pick any kind of science background or degree, like an engineer or something, you have to work in a bigger town because there's fewer and far jobs that are in between. But I picked pharmacy because I like science, and I could eventually work in a small town, but also own my own business. That's what I really liked about that. So I chose that as my career.
Good, I love that. We like to talk about entrepreneurial journeys and the choices that you make and the steps along the way. So that's a nice story. And your pharmacy business is a bit specialized, right? It's you got some special attributes to it.
It's very specialized, and the most important attribute is my wife, Janet, who is also a pharmacist. We opened up our pharmacy in 1998 because we just didn't see. We both worked in corporate environments, whether it be big chain store pharmacies or whether it be like a hospital pharmacy, which is where I worked. And as individuals, we had very little control over our own work situation, and we wanted to be able to take care of patients the way we thought it would best happen instead of being told by a corporate environment about what they thought was the best. So we just really weren't getting enough time to spend with our patients and to make a difference like we wanted to. So that's kind of why we ventured into our own business.
Well, good. Now, again, we always encourage entrepreneurs to think about how can they be different, how can they specialize, how can they cater to a particular population in a different way. And it certainly sounds like you've done that.
Well, one thing that really changed our practice is that I had family members and friends. It's like, well, how are you going to compete with the big chain stores? And I'm like, well, we're not going to. We're not going to try to compete with them. We're going to make a niche where we don't compete with them. And one thing we've done in our pharmacy is that we've really focused on a health and wellness type model. So we try to educate and empower individuals on how to control their own health. And one of the things we do in the pharmacy is we do a lot of customized hormone replacement for females and for males. And having proper hormone balance, optimized hormones, along with lifestyle changes like diet and lifestyle and exercise and sleep patterns and things like that, you can really work your way towards optimal health. And that's what we've really done in our pharmacy. And most big chain store type environments don't offer that. They're just basically prescription counters and collectors of copays for insurance. So we wanted to be different.
Well, it's another great lesson, Shawn, that it's always possible to find that area of uniqueness. You called it a niche. We like to think of it as uniqueness. So there's only one pair of people, one pharmacy doing what you do, and that's the right way.
That's right.
So that gives us an interesting segue into your book. I've got it in front of me. It's called Sickened: How the Government Ruined Healthcare and How to Fix It. And we're going to concentrate today on the how to fix it part, because your book's very entrepreneurially creative. And we like to emphasize that it's the entrepreneur and the consumer together co-navigating the areas of innovation, the areas of value creation. I think you do that in your book. So I read section 6 with a special attention. It's a 6-step solution. And number 1 is what you just referred to. Commit to owning and controlling your own health. That's the consumer, right? The individual. So let's dig into that. Tell us about that mindset and that behavior, Shawn, what you prescribe for people and taking care of their own health.
Well, first of all, that's one of my goals, and it has been for, since 1998 when we opened the pharmacy, is to educate and empower consumers that they are in charge of their own health. I, as a pharmacist, can educate them and a doctor can educate them, but how often does that really happen? 24 hours a day, the patient is with themselves to be able to change their own habits. And I think we forget in the healthcare system, we get lost in the shuffle because it's such a big system and corporately ran, that we think we're just a small fish in the pond. But in reality, individuals are the only thing that can make changes in anything, including healthcare, and it all starts with the individual. So we kind of changed our habits a lot in 1998, or our pharmacy practice anyway. I'm sorry, in 2002, when we just decided we really, really went with our health and wellness model, because we really realized that, we had Janet had a patient that came to her and basically said, I've eaten myself to death. And she was in her early 50s and she was going to die. And she was morbidly obese and she was on 20 different medications, ranging from high blood pressure to diabetes to high cholesterol. The list goes on, right, of lifestyle created diseases. And we realized that it's like, we're not doing anything to help this lady by just giving her medications. We're actually enabling her bad lifestyle choices. So we decided to make changes then. and try to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. And that's kind of where it kind of started. And that's kind of the journey of my book too. And that's why the first step is, being proactive in your own health. And in that chapter, the way I lead off the chapter is a quote from myself saying, the best health insurance that we have, it's not some kind of policy that we can buy. It's how we take care of ourselves. Those are just the facts. That's the best health insurance we have.
Yeah. We talk about the healthcare system, Shawn. One of the ways we like to look at things is that the consumer has a system as well. And you refer to a system of keeping yourself well. And that includes the food that you eat and the exercise that you take, obviously, the doctors and hospitals that you have connections to, but your friends and supporters, people like yourself. So the consumer can, or the patient or the individual can think about building a system for themselves and what's the best system for them.
Absolutely. And, you look at history and it's crystal clear in history that the way to fix problems is in a free market, and individuals being educated and empowered, um, and knowing that they're in charge, that's what creates a system that actually works when they're in a free market to make choices based on price, based on service, and based on quality. It's no different than any other industry. Healthcare is no different. And when consumers actually are empowered to make their own choices, the free market will fix the system like in any other industry.
Yeah. Just a philosophical question, Shawn. For the individual to make those kinds of choices, is that just self-reliance on their part? Is it smart choices? Is it doing your homework? Is it discovering things? Or do you see it more as a responsibility, a duty, a kind of moral imperative to take care of yourself? What's the best way to look at it?
I think it's the best way is really difficult to say what the best way is, because I think what you said, it's it's all the above.
Hmm.
But first of all, I think they have to have reason. Um, and one of the reasons is, and when we look at reasons, it's economics. I mean, when we look at economics in general, it drives us. It really just does. I know that might sound selfish in the healthcare world, but it's just true. Economics drive us. So when there is accountability, and when you have to have accountability for your own health, i.e., let's say this. Let's say if you don't take care of your own health, it's going to cost your pocketbook a lot. And no matter the situation that you're in, it really does cost you, whether you're paying for the healthcare directly or not. It is costing you for sure, especially in long-term consequences. But when we have economics, when it involves economics and involves people's pocketbooks, they will be empowered and inclined more to make healthy choices. So, that's kind of what my goal is with the book, is just to educate people that, when they do make better choices, they're better off, not just health wise, but economically wise too. It creates an economic incentive.
Yeah. And that long-term view, especially, which we always encourage.
A quick note: did you know that we provide supplemental materials for each podcast? Listening to and understanding the key takeaways from our expert guests helps you think better about building a more beautiful business. Taking direct action and implementing these strategies is when the real work begins. Take a concrete, immediate step to implementing a better business model today by downloading the show notes and business tool we've created for this episode. Visit Mises.org/E4Bpod. That's MISES.org/E, the number 4, the letter B, POD, and click on today's episode. Now, back to our interview.
So let's go there into the dollars and cents. Your step number 2 in your insurance system is to look for cash and out-of-pocket options that you can pay for directly for healthcare. So tell us a little bit about why you advocate that in comparison to conventional insurance, and then we'll talk about what's available. But just tell us the case for doing that.
Well, with conventional traditional insurance, basically, usually people are dictated on where they can go to the doctor, where they can go to the hospital, what clinic they can they can go to, what labs they can access. And people don't traditionally know the costs. Now, because they just say, well, my insurance is going to cover it. So they don't look at the cost because they just look at their insurance being covered. They don't know any different. So when they have to actually look at what the prices are when there are cash options, they can find out that many times their paying out of pocket is going to be cheaper than what their insurance is. Let me give you a good example. Let's say an insurance pays 80% of a covered procedure, and they send you to get an MRI, and they tell you where to go that's preferred. You get this MRI, it's $3,000. You pay 20%, you pay $600. What else happened there? Well, your doctor and you had to wait a bunch of time to get a prior authorization for the MRI. And the service wasn't necessarily as good. And the quality maybe was probably the same, but the price was $3,000. But the insurance covered it. I only had to pay $600. Or you could pay directly cash, have an MRI probably tomorrow, no prior authorization, no waiting, and you could pay $500 out of pocket. I mean, that's literally, there's thousands and thousands of stories like that. And the great thing is about the cash market, like any other commodity, like any other service, price goes down as service goes up. So I've seen MRIs in some markets. We've interviewed some doctors that have a place where they can refer patients to an MRI for like $300. And those systems were not really available like 5 years ago because there wasn't a cash market. Now, because health insurance has gotten so tremendously expensive, and there's so many people that have high deductibles, high copays, or they just don't access the traditional insurance market. They go with something different. There's a lot of people paying out of pocket now. So if they're paying out of pocket, there's a lot more options now too, because the free market reacts to that. And so there's more of that. The price goes down, service goes up, quality goes up in many instances. So that's a perfect example with the MRI. If people search for cash prices, they don't have to wait for those authorizations. Surgery is the same way. I know many people, we talk about the Surgery Center of Oklahoma all the time. Dr. Keith Smith is an entrepreneur, true entrepreneur, opened up a surgery center in 1997 to get out of government healthcare billing. And he offers, cash options for surgeries. He has many examples of people that say, well, I'm going to use my insurance so I can get this $40,000 operation. And next thing you know, they pay $10,000. They wait months to get the service. Or they could have went to Surgery Center of Oklahoma and paid $8,000.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Smith has been with us, and I know he's set up the Free Market Medical Association to encourage that kind of innovation, which we love. So since we first talked, Shawn, I did a little bit of research and I was trying to find out more about these cash options. And I discovered a couple of acronyms for that kind of practice. One was DPC, which I think means direct primary care, right? You just go and pay for primary care. Another one was called cash FFS, which is cash fee for service, which I guess doing what you say, doctors charging a fee for that service. So how widespread are those? How, for the average consumer in America, is it hard to find them? Is it easy to find them? What's the availability?
Right. They're easy to find. So first of all, if you type in direct primary care, I don't know off the top of my head what the website is, but if you type in direct primary care in my area or something like that, it'll pull up a DPC, direct primary care doctor in your area. And they're all over. In fact, the only state I don't know that there's any in is South Dakota. And I'm not sure why that is, but there might be cash fee for service options in South Dakota. You could always call to find out. But let me just explain what direct primary care is, because I talk about direct primary care in my book. It's kind of one of the fixes because it is a cash option. I personally like having a fee for service option or direct primary care option. When we talk about direct primary care, that's more of a membership model. So you pay a monthly fee and it's incredibly affordable. You pay a monthly fee to have 24/7 access to a doctor. The fees range from $50 a month to $100 a month. The nice thing is, like in any free market, pricing varies on DPCs depending on the doctor, depending on the market. And some doctors will like if you pay for a family, you pay $100 for a family, $50 for each adult, your kids are free, or your kids are $5 each, or and I know a doctor that he charges based on age, and if they're less than 20, it's so many dollars, and it's a little higher if you're 20 to 40, and so on. And then like in your 60s, it's a little higher, like in the $70 range or something, still very affordable. And I love it because when the patient hits 100 and he's got 200-year-old patients, they're $1 a month.
Yeah.
So these patients are getting 24 access to him for $1 a month. I love the free market. That's how it works. Now, I personally like fee for service stuff too, because I'm a big believer. My personal self is I don't like monthly fees. And I'm not saying direct primary care is not good, because it's a great option for many, many people. I like fee for service options personally. And I love direct primary care. I don't particularly have direct primary care. And here's one of the reasons I say I don't. It's not because I don't believe in it. It's just because I have kind of an unfair advantage. I mean, Janet and I have access to healthcare pretty easy with a lot of direct primary care doctors, and we try to take advantage of them, but we can access them pretty easy. So we don't pay for a direct primary care, but I think most people should definitely. So but I also like fee for service, because sometimes if you're doing a monthly fee, you might be paying for something you don't need necessarily. And fee for service is great, because many times you can see, a primary care provider for, a sore throat or what have you for $75. I mean, it's very, very, and you can get in right away. So it's very, very affordable. I don't think people realize that. So that's why it's important for people to know that there are cash options, and healthcare doesn't have to be expensive. In fact, what makes healthcare expensive, given the MRI model that we just talked about, insurance is what makes healthcare expensive, because the consumer is not paying the final bill. So then the price goes up because they don't have to be fiduciary responsible to the consumer.
Right. So we talk a lot, Shawn, about the equal role of the consumer in these emerging innovations. And you talked about the metaphor of searching for direct primary care. So we need to encourage consumers to take their role in discovery, and then encourage the physicians to take the entrepreneurial step of making the offer and getting those markets to emerge. So I appreciate what you do in there, and I know the Free Market Medical Association tries to do the same thing. So moving through your 6-point plan, you say, hey, there are also some other options, not quite as direct, but useful with employers, like health savings accounts and something you call redirects of insurance premium payments to retirement savings accounts. So tell us about those options, and again, how widespread they are and how available they are, and how should people use them?
Yeah, so they're getting more widespread, and one of the reasons why is because healthcare, traditionally for the many years now, employers have been paying for people's health insurance. And if you back that up, you can actually, if you back up in history, which I do in my book, if you read my book, it talks about how that actually happened. And it wasn't necessarily the free market that demanded health insurance. It was actually if you back up in the 1940s, President Roosevelt, FDR, President Roosevelt, was worried about inflation during the war, wage inflation, because businesses were hiring. He worried about wage inflation, so he put a cap on wages. And so if company XYZ, I'll just use some examples. If General Motors, building tanks and airplanes at the time, they really needed a lot of people. If they wanted to hire somebody away from Ford Motor Company, it's like, well, I can't pay you any more than Ford Motor Company because the wages are set by the government. So as is always, and I use always very carefully, but I do honestly believe this, the free market always wins. Always, in the end. Sometimes it takes a long time, but the free market always wins. So the free market found a workaround, and it said, okay, so the employer says, I can't pay you anymore, but I can offer you hospital insurance. Look, you have a baby or your kid gets sick or whatever, you're not going to have to pay for the hospital. We'll pay for that. So that was an enticement to be able to go to another company to offer hospital insurance. So, fast forward, 70 years later,
Mhm.
and we've got employers basically paying for people's health insurance. Now, what does that do? Well, that essentially takes the freedom to choose out of from the employee. But employees don't really realize that. They're just like, oh, my company offers me good insurance and it's a great benefit. But in reality, they're being told what to do by their employer, what doctor they can go to, what hospital they can go to, and it costs them a lot of money. The average, I think the average premium for a family now in a year is $24,000. That's $2,000 a month. Well, most people don't use $2,000 worth a month of healthcare expenses. So, how would those employees like to have the money themselves?
Mhm.
Say, hey, go to their employer and say, you know what? I don't want your fancy health insurance. I don't want you to tell me how to take care of my health care. I am at liberty to choose the best for me as an individual and my family. So, how about you give me that $2,000 a month and I decide what kind of healthcare I want to purchase? And some people might want that fancy $2,000 a month healthcare. Some people, like myself, will find other options where it only costs me $200 a month because I believe that the best health insurance is how I take care of myself. And I know that I can access inexpensive healthcare if needed. Employees have to start lobbying their
Mhm.
employer to say, I don't want that anymore. And employers just can't, period. They just can't afford it. It's not sustainable. So eventually, employers are not going to be able to afford the healthcare to pay for their employees. So they can give it out in health savings accounts, or they could give it out you know in wages, or
Mhm.
if the individual negotiated that. One of the problems with health savings accounts is that the government knows this is happening, and of course, I believe the government likes to control us when it comes to our health care, and so they're really trying to highly regulate health savings accounts, and they're trying to not let health savings accounts be paid for by like direct primary care. You can't pay for them direct primary care with a health savings account. So that's another thing that we need to do is we just need to make sure that government lets us decide what we can do with our own health savings account dollars. So, so because the individuals need to be in charge of their own health care, including the financial part of it.
So those regulations at the federal level or at the state level, Sean?
They are at the federal level, and I don't know where it's at. I know there was a big push to let DPC be covered by health savings accounts. I don't really know where it's at right now, Hunter. I'm not sure, but we just need to be proactive with our legislators, whether it be state and federal, that they need to let us decide what we do with our healthcare dollars.
Yeah. I ask that because I've just been monitoring recently some of what the regulators call these regulatory sandboxes, which are occurring at the state level, and it's happening in the financial services industry, for example, in fintech, where you can take an innovation which might not currently be approved of by regulation and put it into the quote sandbox unquote, and the regulators will look at it quickly and see if they can make any adjustments to the regulatory environment to help the fintech company operate. So I think that kind of thing could happen in healthcare as well.
Sure, for sure.
Um, and then step 5 is why don't the healthcare providers adopt cash only payment systems? No insurance, all third party, run a consumer focused business. So are any of them moving in that direction?
Oh, absolutely. Um, the DPC movement, for instance, is growing tremendously. I have interviewed many of them on my podcast, Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, and it's growing. In fact, it's growing so fast, which I'm excited about. That there are resident physicians, so they are just fresh out of school, and they do not want to practice in the current healthcare environment because they realize that it's corporately ran and they don't get to they're not empowered to make decisions for their patients. So they are directly out of residency going into a direct primary care model. Now, why is that good? The more their direct primary care model grows, then the more they'll have referral sources that they can send to a specialist that is a cash specialist, like Dr. Smith. Direct primary care doctors love to send to him because they know he's affordable.
Mhm.
And so there's urologists now, there are orthopedic surgeons now that are doing cash services, and the direct primary care love referring to them. There's imaging companies, doctors. We interviewed her. She owns an imaging company and she's expanding all around the country, and she focuses on cash imaging.
Yeah, that's
Very
great.
affordable.
That's great innovation. So we look in the economic world at what we call the disaggregation of the corporation. The giant corporations are farming out or disassembling themselves and buying services from the outside that used to be on the inside. And so independent, smaller companies are more and more viable, and then they're attached in a network to the larger providers. So it sounds like some of that is starting to happen in healthcare.
It is. It truly is. And it just has to happen. And I will tell you that, Dr. Smith has been great at promoting this, and just great at innovating in healthcare and in inspiring others. Um, a quote on my book I took from Dr. Smith. And when I interviewed him a few years ago, this is a quote he made. And I used to really be careful about talking about my colleagues or talking about doctors that are inside the system and telling them, well, you need to get out of the system. That's the only option. I wouldn't tell them that necessarily, even though I'd been out of the system and I felt liberated once I got out of the system. But, Dr. Smith in my book, Sickened, How the Government Ruined Healthcare and How to Fix It, there's a quote in there about when he was inside the system, he felt like an accessory to the crime. And, that's a powerful statement. And I use that quote from him, so I'm not using it, but I just repeat it because coming from him, it means a lot. And I can tell you, when I was in the system and I was under corporate healthcare and I was, billing insurance companies for thousands and thousands of dollars of drugs that people might not need, I was an accessory to the crime. And I will tell you, there's a lot of physicians that actually either go into DBC or go into a fee for service cash only model, or they get completely out of medicine because they realize what a racket it is that, hospitals charging 10 times over market value for things that, the physician is getting paid a few $100s
Yeah.
for, so.
Well, it's a great form of bottom-up innovation. The individual doctors themselves who say, "I can't live in the system. I'll find some other way to organize."
Well, I had a doctor that was on my podcast, and he said, in order to fix the system, I figured I had to get out of it.
Mhm.
I kind of agree, Hunter, is that the system is so big and so powerful because most of it is financed by the government. Let's face it, 70 to 80% of all healthcare is paid for by government services, whether it be state or whether it be federal. So it's really hard to fix that. So the best way to do is get out of it and open a free market solution, and let consumers decide how to innovate.
Right. And so, in our way of thinking, a lot of that innovation occurs at the margin, and then it seeps into the rest of the system. So you mentioned another organizational innovation that's major, but just getting started, and it's called medical cost sharing program. So uh, tell us about that, and whether you see a big future for medical cost sharing programs.
I see a big future in them. And if you look at the history of them, they traditionally were known as health sharing ministries. So
Mhm.
they were all faith based. And, some of them were MediShare, Christian healthcare, um, Samaritan ministries, and so on. And they, you usually had to have some kind of statement of faith to be a member of them. And when the Affordable Care Act was passed under Obamacare, there was some law in there that they didn't have to be faith-based anymore. So there were some health sharing ministries or health sharing programs that came out of that are non-faith based. The first one I can think of is New Health, KNEW. We actually interviewed them on our podcast, Health Solutions, with Shawn and Janet Needham, and they're non-faith based. They like all those programs, you pay a monthly fee to be a member. It's not insurance. They make it clear that it's not health insurance. but you pay a monthly fee for these. And depending on the company, or depending on what program that you pick, you can get services covered. So, and what happens is the members, if you do have a claim, and it's not really a claim because it's not insurance, but if you do have some kind of hospital visit that needs to be covered, the actual members of that group are the ones that are paying for your bill. So for instance, my son had broke his leg, compound fracture back last May, and we're a member of Christian Healthcare. And it's a long story. And of course, I didn't have a big choice of where I could go, because I was, it was kind of an emergency. So the hospital did what they could, and of course, overbilled us by manyfold. But I negotiated a price down, and then Christian Healthcare wrote me a check. I paid the hospital, and then Christian Healthcare wrote me a check back. Now, why is that good? Well, because I had to be responsible for the bill, not somebody else. I was responsible for it. So because I was responsible for it, I want to negotiate a discount. So I negotiated a discount, and the discount was $9,000 because it was $48,000. So the discount was darn near $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I paid the hospital, they paid me back. And now people don't need to get too concerned about, a lot of people wouldn't have the check to write them for that. But here's the thing. Hospitals will make up a payment plan. So you just start making payments until you get reimbursed, and, the hospital then you can pay the hospital bill. And the great thing was, I had a bronze plan, which is the least coverage, highest deductible, even though it's not insurance, so it's not really a deductible. And because my deductible was $5,000, and because I negotiated a bigger discount than the deductible, they waived my deductible. So it ended up costing zero out of pocket. So I was really motivated financially to get a discount. I mean, that's how we empower individuals, when they get to take charge. Now, if a traditional health insurance was involved, the individual consumer would have no say in it whatsoever.
Right.
And that's when prices skyrocket and service goes down.
Is it possible that these cost-sharing programs might get overwhelmed with a rush of cases? Let's say all their members got affected by COVID-19 and had to get into hospital and on ventilators and so on, all at the same time. Could they get overwhelmed? What's the protection against that?
Well, that's what's the beauty about a free market. And these are not as regulated as traditional health insurance. And I say in my book that there's no such thing as private health insurance anymore, because health insurance is so heavily regulated by the government. They're told what to pay for, at what price to pay for it. So it's really all government insurance if you go into the traditional insurance. Here's the beauty about a free market, like with health sharing programs, is that since the over the last 10 years or so, since the Affordable Care Act was passed, these things have been growing. I don't want to use the term exponentially because I'm not a mathematician, but they've been growing by leaps and bounds. Okay. And what's happened too is that more of them have come out. So Sedera, Zion Health, those weren't available. New Health, those weren't available 5 or 10 years ago. Now more of them are coming out because they realize they work so well. It's a free market solution to healthcare, and it works well. So, it's like in any other industry. Does the car industry get overwhelmed when people start demanding more cars? Maybe for a little bit, but they find a way, if they are incentivized financially, to make more cars. Healthcare should be no different. In a free market, it will work, and people get taken care of even better. And I just ask that our listeners go to one of their websites. There's a lot of stories on, how somebody had a heart attack or somebody had cancer, and a lot of COVID stories now too, and how these health sharing ministries or health sharing programs are helping people to pay these bills and actually save money while doing it.
Yeah.
I just ask that you go to their website and check out their stories. So Christian Healthcare has lots of stories like that.
Okay. So you had a great term in your book, Shawn, health creation. So the context for us is we talk a lot about value creation, That's what entrepreneurs do. But in fact, they're involved in a co-creation with consumers. In fact, we believe consumers create value because without consumption, there is no value, and producers facilitate that. You talk about health creation, keeping people healthy and controlling healthcare costs. So tell us about that as a concept, health creation.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I mean, health creation is kind of in the simplest form. It is just what it says it is. I mean, you create your own health. And I think, traditionally when we look at the healthcare system, we look at the healthcare system as being expensive, but in reality, what is the healthcare system when we think about it? It's a sick care system. So, you have high blood pressure, we give you medications. You have sore knees, we do surgery on you, even though you're 100 pounds overweight. So, another example would be sleep apnea. You have sleep apnea, and the most common reason for sleep apnea is being a middle-aged, overweight male.
Mhm.
So, two of those you can't control, but the biggest one, being overweight, you can control. That's health creation. So, it's lifestyle medicine. And so, rather than waiting until the ship is sinking, you prevent it from sinking. You create your own health. Just like I said in chapter 6 of Sickened, how the government ruined healthcare and how to fix it. The best health insurance we have is not some policy that we can buy, but it's how we take care of ourselves. That's the health creation. When you look at the overall cost of our healthcare system, it's not healthcare, it's sick care. And most of those expenses go to treat lifestyle related diseases. I already named some of them. I can name some more. Um, you know, uh, you even look at things like joint replacement, whether it be hips or whether it be knees, plantar fasciitis, erectile dysfunction, many different diseases that we treat that are actually lifestyle related. Diabetes, and all of cardiovascular health. Cardiovascular health is the number one killer of Americans, and it continues to be. And so obesity related disease, and largely it's related to obesity. So if we can create health, we can prevent many cardiovascular accidents from stroke and heart attacks.
Yeah,
That's what I mean when I talk about health creation.
good. I love the term and I love the idea. So we're talking really about a culture change here from sick care to healthcare. We had a little discussion about how does that kind of cultural change happen. So one of the things that comes to my mind always is organic food adoption. So the people who talked about organic food 10 or 15 or 20 years ago were fringe crazies, and now it becomes more and more mainstream. It's in all the supermarkets. All the manufacturers have started to have healthy organic options, and that was a cultural change driven by what we call consumer sovereignty. The consumer demanded it, maybe not overtly and not in a way that you can point to specifically, but the consumer demands it, and the culture changes in favor of organic and healthy foods. So, how do you see that? How do you start that happening in the healthcare business? Do you think?
Yeah, well, I think one of the ways we started is, by having podcasts like this, where we educate and empower consumers to take care of their own health. My book, that's what my book is all about. My podcast, Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, that's what it's all about. It's got to start with one person. It's got to start with, and we have to empower the individual. And, if we look back on that history, I love that analogy of organic foods. And actually, James Maskell from New Health, KNEW New Health, a health sharing program. He's the one that used that analogy, and I use that in my book with his interview, because it all started. If we looked at that history of organic foods, you're right. I mean, it would have been one or two people, saying this, and it's like, oh well, we don't even know what to do. Well, in free markets, that's what'll happen. It'll happen in healthcare. You're seeing it now. I think we are seeing this now in healthcare
Mhm.
with the big movement of DPC, direct primary care, is that patients are demanding it. So doctors are like, you know what, I can do this, and that's what's happening. So it starts with one individual, and people just going out there and educating people how they can be empowered to take charge of their own health. So I think we're seeing it happening now.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Another analogy I always look at is in Italy, there was a movement that they called slow food. And it was a reaction against everything that's implied by fast food.
Oh, okay.
It's not good. It's just cheap and fast. And these Italian chefs and gourmets said, well, no, what we need is slow food. And you sit and you savor, and it comes from the earth and all of those kinds of things. And language is important, is the point I'm trying to get to. And your concept of health creation is that kind of language. And the other language we need is to say that the solution's in our own hands. We don't have to put up with this system. We can change it by individual action. So why don't you sum up there, Shawn?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's true. I mean, I think the free market fixes pretty much any industry, and healthcare is no different. And it all starts with, in a free market, it all starts with a consumer, and then there needs to be some way for them to buy goods. And in healthcare, it's a doctor. They really need a doctor, and that's another thing. I mean, doctors need to take charge of the healthcare system again, instead of big corporate medicine taking care of it, individual doctors. So that's why free market solutions with an individual patient seeing an individual doctor is really what is going to fix the system. And those doctors can educate those consumers about how inexpensive healthcare can be, and educate them on just health and wellness in general.
Good, Shawn. Well, thank you for your input today. Thank you for all you do. We'll link to your book on our key takeaways notes on our podcast site, and make some of those other connections that you've suggested for people. And we just urge everybody to push the frontiers, push the boundaries, find those DPCs and other opportunities in the marketplace. And we encourage doctors to be individualistic, and I'm sure you've started the movement. So thank you, Shawn.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me on. It's been a true honor.
It's been a pleasure for us. Thank you.
Economics for Business is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit Mises.org. And for more from Hunter Hastings, visit hunterhastings.com.